Hi, this is Richard Jacobs with myduiattorney.org, and I'm here today to interview Shannon Wilson. She's a criminal defense attorney and DUI defense attorney out of Salem and Portland, Oregon. How you doing, Miss Wilson?
Very good. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem.
If you're okay with it, let's just start on the questions right away.
Sure.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah. First question is, I always ask, what made you choose to handle DUI cases in particular, and what motivates you in general to be a criminal defense attorney?
sure. Well, even before I decided to become an attorney, I was very interested in the criminal justice system. I focused on criminal justice in my undergraduate degree. Um, and when I entered law school, I knew that I was going to be focusing on getting, my experience and education in criminal justice.
Yep.
So when I did graduate from Lewis and Clark, in 2005, I did receive a certificate in criminal law, and DUI defense work is just another branch of criminal defense work here in Oregon. I really enjoy doing that type of work because of it's very complicated here in Oregon, and there's a lot of changes in the law, recent changes actually, and so it's a very exciting area of defense work here in Oregon.
Okay, and later on, I'll ask you about the recent changes in the law because I'm sure people watching will be really interested in that. So it'll be important to them. Um, is there any typical circumstance of the people that you defend? Are there more first time people or more men than women?
I would say that DUI defendants come all different walks of life. There's not really a particular demographic that I see more than others. Um, you know, People receive DUIs for a number of different situations, and I'm not quite, I don't remember offhand the types of questions that you have lined up for me, but there are a number of different ways that you can get a DUI here in Oregon, and it doesn't necessarily always, require alcohol use. Um, it ranges from people that are underage, not quite yet 21, to I've had clients that are, retired and
Hmm.
7 years old. So it really doesn't matter.
Okay, okay. And of the clients you see, is there any commonality for the alcohol DUI ones? Are they more close to the point oh 0.08 limit? Are they higher or lower?
Uh, Probably I would say that the most, if you're talking about my experience, the most that I see are around, 0.12, 0.14, 0.16. For some reason I see a lot of that. But it's all over the board also. I've seen 0.05, I've seen 0.24. It varies a lot. And that's, when you're talking about an alcohol DUI.
Okay. Um, and then in the cases that you see, I mean, are you seeing more alcohol related DUIs or are you seeing more drug related ones?
Um, I think that probably most recently I've seen a combination. Either the state is in their filing on with the criminal charge, you're seeing either alcohol or alcohol and controlled substance driving under the influence charges. And there's a number of different reasons for that. Prescription drug use, often some of those prescription drugs are controlled substances, sometimes they're not. But the state likes to use the additive effects theory. And yeah,
Okay.
so we're seeing more and more. I think that I'm seeing more and more of that. And I think that the defense bar is also seeing more and more of that. If the state isn't initially, prosecuting alcohol and controlled substance in their initial pleading, their initial filing, then they can't try to bring that up later. So I think that they're doing that if there is any sort of, reference to prescription drug use that may or may not be a controlled substance. They're kind of doing this broad charge just in case they. It's a wider net that they can cast as
Right.
far as whether or not somebody is or is not adversely affected by intoxicants. They don't
Okay.
just have make it specifically alcohol related.
Gotcha.
Like,
You mentioned the additive effect theory. Can you explain what that's about?
sure. Just briefly, because without having a legal background, it gets kind of complicated. But
Okay.
basically, if you use use a prescription drug, okay, and that prescription drug is a controlled substance, and you say, let's say you have very, very little alcohol use, or you had, half of a beverage or one beverage, and you take a breath test, and you're not even blowing over that legal limit. If the state can prove that your prescription drug, in combination with the use of alcohol, created, an increased effect of the alcohol in your system, then you could be found guilty of a DUI here in Oregon. So you don't
Huh.
even need to consume such an enormous amount of alcohol, or a certain amount of alcohol, to put you over that zero point zero 0.08 limit. It could be, 0.05, zero point zero 0.04, and then you're on some sort of prescription drug, that is a controlled substance. And oftentimes you'll see that the police officer, even the drug recognition, expert, evaluator, they'll do they'll get a urinalysis test if they suspect there's other substances involved. And in that urinalysis test, you want to get a good read on that and request all the charts and documentation from the forensics crime lab here in Oregon. But oftentimes you'll even see that the officer and the evaluation expert, which they shouldn't, but I've had experience where they really didn't know the difference between what was a controlled substance and what wasn't a controlled substance, because there
Hmm.
could be prescription drugs that are non-controlled substance. So then it gets really, really interesting, where the state has to prove that it was the controlled substance and not just the prescription non-controlled substance that was mixing with that alcohol that produced the effects of the officer observed. So it gets really, really interesting,
Huh.
and especially with prescription drug use, in the United States, all sorts of different things can happen. So it's a very interesting area of law, I think.
So, as a scenario, let's say I took, I had a cold, I took pseudoephedrine, and then I had, I don't know, one beer. I was pulled over, and I blew like a point oh 0.05. You're saying the state would still, if pseudoephedrine was controlled, I'm guessing it is, the state would still try to say, well, the effect of the pseudoephedrine plus the alcohol actually really impaired me more than the reading that I gave on the breathalyzer, so therefore I'm guilty?
Yes, exactly. And we're just talking about, the additive effects, and like a Miles instruction of what it's called here in Oregon, where they're saying that it's a combination of the alcohol and a controlled substance. But, you could still be found guilty of a controlled substance DUI. You don't even have to have any sort of read on the breath test, and then they either test your urine or your blood later, and they find a controlled substance. The state can try to go back and retroactively calculate what the effect of that controlled substance was at the time that you were arrested, or at the time that the driving behavior was observed by the officer.
Okay, and the reason I ask is that
Yeah.
yeah, DUI seems to be going way beyond just alcohol now to illegal drugs, now to legal drugs, controlled prescription drugs. That's why I'm asking. It's just very interesting.
Yes, it's under the Oregon statute. It's three things. It could be, alcohol, intoxicants, or inhalants, and so the intoxicants could be a controlled substance.
Okay. Okay.
And there was, I think, a little while back, there was something about, um, bringing in non-controlled substance, as, say something that was a cold medicine, or Benadryl. If
Okay.
you ever taken, some people take Benadryl, it makes them very sleepy.
Right.
And I think there was somebody pushing some sort of, I don't remember exactly who, not too long ago, trying to loop in non-controlled substances in the DUI law. But that's
And another hypothetical situation about drugs. Let's say I'm a medical marijuana user, and I smoked. I don't know, 5 days ago. I haven't smoked since, and I go out driving, and I get pulled over, and the police officer, for some reason, believes I'm impaired, and they do a urine or a blood test, and they do find evidence of marijuana in my system. Will I be arrested for DUI? Will I be convicted? What will happen?
Well, in order for them to do the test at all, you are arrested for DUI at that point. The officer has to establish probable cause that you're under the influence of, in this case, marijuana, before they can take you in and have you provide that sample.
Okay.
So whether or not you're going to be charged for DUI, most likely, I would say yes. Initially, they'll write you the citation for DUI if the DRE came in. There's an expert that says that your behavior is, demonstrate that behavior for somebody who uses marijuana, and say the patrol officer saw some, slow driving or erratic driving or whatever they want to say that, driving under the influence of marijuana would produce.
Okay.
So you would be, but in it doesn't really change medical marijuana or marijuana. The key issue here is based on those observations and based on the results of the test. Can they prove at the time you were driving that you were under the influence? So that's the key here. Now, where medical marijuana users run into a lot of issues here that are different from regular or your normal alcohol DUI is
Okay.
when it comes to treatment programs. So if you'd like me to get into that, I'd love to.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
you know,
Say about that.
there's diversion available here in Oregon, as I'm sure anybody who looks on the internet will find that pretty fast and see whether or not they qualify for that. And the requirements for diversion, also the requirements for a first or second time or third time conviction is going to be mandatory treatment. Well, we'll get into the third time charge for DUI a little bit later when we get into the recent changes. But for diversion or for court ordered drug and alcohol treatment, you're going to have to participate in treatment programs. And a lot of clients are experiencing difficulties because there's some programs that have not always allowed medical marijuana use while they're going through the program.
Mm.
So there are some treatment facilities that are more liberal and progressive and understand the medical benefits of marijuana. So oftentimes I like to seek out those treatment facilities and try to get my client involved with those facilities as soon as possible. Because the more control you take of your case at the beginning of your case, the less the court is, I think going to want to push you into, through ADES, which is the Alcohol and Drug Evaluation Services here. If you get them already in touch with this program, you could say, hey, I've already been in touch with this program, I've been proactive about my treatment, can I continue here? Can you, make your referral for the court to this place?
Okay. Okay. Very good.